Hi, I'm Emily Grunes, Environmental Engineering Senior here at UVM, and today I'm going to share with you guys my experience with a research project that I've been involved with here at the university this past summer. So just to orient ourselves, the site of this project is located in the Canyon de Chelly National Monument, and for those of you who don't know, it's located in the upper northeast corner of Arizona on the Navajo Nation, and it's this incredible canyon filled with these ancient cave dwellings. So just for some historical background on the site, it is one of the longest continuously inhabited landscapes of North America, with archaeologists believing that it was built, some of the structures were built as early as 200 BCE. And since then, there's been many different peoples who have inhabited this landscape, and even today, the Dine, which is the indigenous word for Navajo, people still live and work in this canyon. So for this project, we had the profound privilege of actually getting to do a site visit to Canyon de Chelly and to conduct our field research. And so we went with a team of archaeologists, historical preservation engineers, and hydrologists, and we got to spend a week in the canyon conducting our work. And something that's really unique about this site is the National Park is run in collaboration with the National Park Service and the Navajo Nation. So you can only visit the site if you're with a Dine guide, and even a lot of Dine people don't want to go up into these ancient sites for cultural reasons of being where the dead have been. So really only people that go into these sites on an annual basis is this small team of park archaeologists. So we went with them, and every day we got to climb up into the sites and investigate the archaeology and the hydrology. So as you walk through these sites, you have to watch where you step, because there's just a bunch of ancient archaeological treasures, pieces of pottery and corn husks, and my favorite was this tuft of human hair that was hundreds of years old. And being in a desert canyon, in a cave, it made this site particularly well preserved compared to lots of other similar sites across the West. And before I went on this project, I sort of had a common misconception about archaeology. I imagined Indiana Jones type characters in the 1700s going and trying to take all of the artifacts and bring them to museums. And that is the sad history of archaeology in the US and around the world. And because of that, we have a bunch of artifacts in museums that weren't properly documented. We don't know where they're from, and we can't learn as much from them. But that is not the case of archaeology anymore. The park archaeologists shared with us their work, and it involves learning as much as possible from these sites and from these artifacts while changing as little as possible. So they would pick up a piece of pottery, collect data on it, and then put it right back where they found it. And rather than historical preservation in a sense of restoration, the idea is how can we maintain these sites in their current state for as long as possible and learn and appreciate them for as long as possible. So you might be wondering where the UVM Environmental Engineering Department comes into this project. And that is because in the Southwest, with the onset of climate change, we're seeing intensified monsoonal activities. And the monsoon seasons is a natural and key part of the hydrological cycle in the Southwest, delivering most of the annual rainfall to the region. But with climate change, we're seeing that these monsoons are intensifying, and that's characterized by longer durations of droughts, followed by shorter, much more intense storms that are delivering large quantities of water and causing damaging runoff and flooding to occur. And as you may imagine, this desert canyon environment is particularly susceptible to these extreme weather events. And Canyon de Chelly over the past decade has seen a series of severe flooding that is implicating these ancient sites and the ability for the park to maintain them for as long as possible. So the UVM Environmental Engineering Department was contracted to first sort of understand how these climatic changes are occurring site-specifically to Canyon de Chelly, and then finding ways to mitigate that in the future. So we used hydraulic modeling to model future climate change scenarios and mitigation strategies that the park could then later implement in the future to reduce these impacts. And we also use a statistical model that can be extrapolated to predict when these extreme events may occur and to what degree in the future for better management of the park. And of course, we're trying to protect these ancient sites, but there's actually a lot more depth to this project. As I mentioned, the canyon is still home to lots of Diné people. And in particular, this project was important for Diné ranchers who rely on these water systems for their ranching and for their livelihood. And for me, the most impactful part of being a part of this project were the conversations that we had with the Diné people who lived in this canyon. And there's one conversation we had that was particularly impactful for me. It was this woman. She was 65 years old and an ultramarathon runner, and she only runs through this canyon, so through the hot desert sand. I could barely walk without being uncomfortable, and she was running ultramarathons, so that was so impressive. And she was so excited to share with us her home, and she said it's the most beautiful place in the world, and she's lived here her whole life, used to go into these canyons and play hide and seek up in the sites. And she also mentioned how throughout her life she's witnessed firsthand these impacts of the changing climate and these changing environmental systems. Severe flooding and droughts and members of her community not being able to support themselves. And hearing those type of points of view, it goes beyond just the mathematical models that we create. And creating these solutions to these problems is not just about engineering, it's about understanding the people that it's impacting and the people who know this canyon so well. For me, seeing the actual structures themselves, they really paint that picture of resilience and adaptation to a changing world and a changing climate. And in the Southwest, in these canyons, there are these little creatures. They're really cute. They're called pack rats, and they build their nests into the cave walls. So they'll dig them and then they'll close them back up. So they basically act as these natural little time capsules. And then scientists today, they can reopen these and find organic material that could be as old as 50,000 years old. And in Canyon de Chelly, they have pieces of wood from these time capsules, and they can look at the rings and they can use that to develop a climatic history of the region. And when you overlay that with the human history of this region, you can see that in the 1300s, there was a very dry period with a severe drought. And that was when Canyon de Chelly was abandoned, meaning that people, even before the Industrial Revolution and before anthropogenic climate change, had to adapt to this relentless environment and leave and then come back in the future when it was adaptable. And to me, that really shows what it means to adapt and continue to learn from your environment. And water resources in the West is highly complex. It is political and it is extremely inequitable. The way that our government runs the water resources and large corporations owning rivers, that's not how it should be. And of course, the communities facing the brunt of this are our indigenous communities and people whose livelihood and life and culture and history revolves so closely to the environment itself and the nature. And throughout American history, the government weaponized that connection. But as in Canyon de Chelly, you can see that they have prevailed and continue to live here, and they can trace their heritage back hundreds, if not thousands of years, to the same sacred canyon. So that brings me back here to Vermont, where today I work at the Vermont Water Resource Institute, doing a lot of research and education about water issues in Vermont and in the region. And I sort of had this connection. In Vermont, we have a similar connection to our land in our own way, where our economy and culture, recreation, food system, they all revolve very closely to our natural environment here in Vermont, our mountains and lakes and rivers. And in a way, that's sort of a similar connection and how we manage these resources and appreciate them. And the idea of flooding and droughts, that hits very close to home here, as obviously this previous summer we had a severe drought and the flooding in the summers before. And understanding that the best way to address these issues is not just the equations that describe the rivers and describe the flooding, but the people that live there and the people that it serves and the environment itself. And in environmental engineering, we sort of learn it in a very black and white way, so that these equations describe the systems. And that's true, but beyond that, the systems are described by the people that live there. So my biggest lesson from this project was how, as an environmental engineer or whatever in the future, ways that we can use these interdisciplinary frameworks and not just think about it in an engineering black and white way. And yeah,